And I think that means we're live. Welcome everybody to State of GraphQL. We're really excited to have you all here. Today's conversation is just going to be hearing from the community, learning from the community, and talking about things happening in the GraphQL ecosystem and things we're doing with GraphQL, answering questions that you all have. We have the YouTube chat, of course, so if you want to go ahead and sign in, ask us questions. Our great panelists will join us in answering and talking about the topics you present, but we also have some prepared stuff that we'll talk about in the meantime. But before we get started, we want to thank our wonderful sponsors. Today, This.Labs is our sponsor. This.Labs is a web consultancy focused in the JavaScript space. So if you have any training, web development needs, etc., definitely feel free to reach out to This.Labs. Our team is rather amazing and international. So if you are on the market looking for an opportunity, we'd love to hear from you. And we work with some pretty incredible teams and clientele. So if any of these names or teams ring a bell or sound interesting or anything sounded interesting, shoot us an email. It was hi@this.co. It was on the last slide, but I moved a little quick through that. But I'm not going to go back. We're going to keep pushing forward. But of course, This.Labs and This.Media host several events, some big ones coming up, some later today. In fact, we have our first ever Vue monthly mentoring happening later today. And then Vue, I haven't been sharing slides this entire time. What am I doing? I'm going to back up a second, give slides an opportunity. Welcome to State of GraphQL. And I'll just speed through the slides. Sponsors, This.Labs, amazing team. There's the email. The amazing client that I was referring to, but not showing y'all any imagery towards. And then the upcoming events, as I was mentioning. So again, starting with Vue monthly mentoring later today. Definitely feel free to come join us. Vue World Tour will be happening on February 15th. We'll be visiting the Boston Meetup group. State of Web Performance, which I'm sure a lot of people, especially those adopting GraphQL, hopefully you all are interested in. So definitely come have that conversation. That'll be on February 22nd. And then next month is going to be first of next month. So a month from today. Wow. State of Angular. So let's talk about GraphQL today and focus on that. But if you're an Angular developer, maybe come to State of Angular and let's talk about some GraphQL tooling at that one. I'm one of your hosts, Dustin Goodman, and I'm an engineering manager over at This.Labs, where I just talked a lot about. And then I'm accompanied by my amazing co-host, who I will let introduce herself.
Hello, everybody. I'm Eve Porcello. I work at Moon Highway, teaching GraphQL and other technologies to engineers. Really excited to be here today. Thanks.
And we are joined by some amazing panelists who I will also allow to introduce themselves. I'll start with Roy and work my way across the board, though.
Hey everyone, I'm Roy. I work in developer relations at StepZen, and about a year ago I also wrote the book Full Stack GraphQL. So maybe we can talk about it later on.
I think that would be absolutely fantastic. And we're joined by Janessa as well.
Hello, I'm Janessa. I'm a developer experience engineer on the education team at Apollo GraphQL. So if you've ever been on our docs, our blog, or our learning platform, Apollo Odyssey, I help build those sites out.
Milecia?
Hey everybody, my name is Milecia. I'm a senior developer advocate at Iterative, which is probably the most not GraphQL related thing here today. We work on tools that help machine learning engineers do data versioning and model versioning. And I'm also writing a book this year about the hidden parts of JavaScript. So all those things that mid-level developers need to know, but nobody ever actually talks about. You just learn on the job. So hopefully that book helps somebody from taking down prod one day.
I think it's a book we all need to read.
I need that book for sure.
That'll be Awesome. And last but definitely not least, Jamie.
Hey everyone, I'm yeah, I can't wait for that book. It's going to be great. Hey everyone, I'm Jamie. I'm a developer advocate at a Headless CMS, Graph CMS, and I create weekly screencasts on GraphQL as well.
Fantastic. I'm gonna pull the screen off and let's start our conversation. Eve, I think you got the first question ready.
Awesome. Well, it's been a while since I've been on a GraphQL event. I feel like the holidays were here and then it's already February somehow, like it or not. And I'm wondering, I love to use this opportunity selfishly to gather data for myself about the coolest GraphQL things out there. So I'm wondering, since you all are in it every day, what are you most excited about in the GraphQL space right now? Are there any tools or companies that are exciting? And it could be stuff you're working on too. Totally. I'd love to hear from anybody who has the hot GraphQL tool for us right now.
I can start off by saying something.
Yeah.
So lately I've been working a lot with Redwood.js, and it comes with GraphQL just already set up and ready to go. So you don't have to think about those crazy configs and why isn't my Apollo client or server not doing what I think it's supposed to do? So it gets rid of a lot of the setup and configs, and you can just jump straight into writing mutations and queries and stuff. So I've been using that to just kind of make these GraphQL servers that pull data from other APIs and just keep it in a central place.
Nice. Amazing. How about you, Roy?
Well, multiple things. So one thing is the company I work with called StepZen,
Yeah.
and that's a directive-based approach to creating GraphQL servers. So you don't even have to write your own resolver code. So that's quite cool. But the directive-based approach itself is also interesting to me as well, because if you look at the latest working draft of the GraphQL spec, which is updated quite a lot since. Well, I think we didn't have a spec until like 2018. It wasn't updated that often, and now it gets updated quite a lot. And there are some new directives in there, so that's what's also really interesting to me.
Nice. Yeah, if you haven't checked out the GraphQL spec lately, you can find it at spec.graphql.org. It's a pretty awesome community that's building that spec. There's a foundation that's administering that now. So like they all get together and decide what should be in that spec. And as Roy said, there's new directives, particularly for the client, that are coming out, stream and defer, that are super exciting, that seem like they're going to make GraphQL on the client so much faster and make the user experience so much better. So shout out to all the people who are working really hard to make that happen. I'm excited as a user just to be able to use those things. Always got to throw it out there. Defer and stream are exciting to me. Anybody else have any hot tools or tips for folks?
Yeah, one of the things which has started to kind of come around again is something called GraphQL Yoga. This was recently picked up by the Guild, and they picked this project up because there was 100 ways to kind of create a GraphQL server. And way back when, GraphQL Yoga from the team over at GraphQL and Prisma, they built this. It went obviously a little bit stale, and then kind of there's other solutions like Apollo Server. And I know there's someone else on the call from Apollo today, but I think it's great to have many choices in this space. Like Apollo Server has been fantastic. GraphQL Yoga was a good alternative. Obviously, there's alternatives in different languages as well, but it's good to kind of see something in the JavaScript ecosystem that's kind of gaining momentum. It's kind of fresh lick of paint, and that's kind of, it's really nice this to use. And the reason why I bring this up is similar to Roy. One of the things we're doing at GraphCMS is allowing you to kind of bring in your own data sources, whether that be REST or GraphQL, and exposing that over on GraphQL. So we become that kind of middleware gateway federating that content. But you can still create your own servers if you want to. So it's good that there's kind of solutions out there if you kind of want to go to that extreme. But yeah, that's one thing that I've seen recently, which has caught my eye, which has been cool.
Nice.
I got a question for you, Jamie. Just mostly because I'm curious. Like, I know Facebook has Yoga, which is their Typeflix layout engine, and now there's GraphQL Yoga. Does that confuse anybody? It confuses me every time somebody says Yoga. I have to ask which one.
Maybe, yeah. I don't know. I search GraphQL Yoga and it does come up. Or the old version did. Maybe the projects gain more SEO. I don't know. It's all about SEO, right? So
Yeah,
probably
absolutely.
a lot of work to be done there.
It's just interesting since, I don't know, GraphQL somewhat originated from Facebook. Yoga somewhat originated from Facebook. Now there's GraphQL Yoga that has nothing to do with either. It's just, it's different.
Naming things is hard. Janessa, do you got any exciting GraphQL things going on? I'm sure you do.
I mean, I don't want to get into too much because we'll probably dive into more Apollo specific stuff later on. But at least in the educational realm, we're making a really big push at Apollo this year around federation, helping people understand it, trying to ease that learning curve. So I won't get into too much right now. We'll do it a little bit later, but
cool.
Just a lot around federation and helping, like, for people that federation is the right tool for them, trying to help it be as painless as it can. So
nice. Well, we might as well get into that topic. It's been brought up 3 times by 3 different people. So I feel like Apollo Federation and the whole concept of federated architectures is a really big deal right now. Long story short, it allows you to create different GraphQL endpoints for different parts of your domain. So like a user's API, a product's API, all in GraphQL, and then create one single spot to bring all that data together in a gateway. So if you haven't checked out any of those tools yet, it's really exciting because it's like, it's a great way to scale out your teams with GraphQL, because dealing with one schema sometimes is really tough for obvious reasons, just everybody having to work with one place, but we still get that nice feature of the gateway to be able to access all the data in one place. So how's everybody feeling right now about these federated tools? Like, what tools are you using for federation? How have you seen this affect different teams? Me personally, I think a lot of folks are going for federation first. Like clients who are training with, like, they haven't used GraphQL yet, but they've heard about federation and now they're in. So it's a really exciting time to think about those tools. Who has something to add about architecture and like what tools are you using for that? Longest question ever, but I'm okay with that.
Yeah, so the last event was in December, which was the GraphQL Contributor Days. I think Lee Byron actually joined and also had an interesting piece on federation. Like there could be multiple ways of federation. So what he said and what I also see from other companies, it's so either people federate by creating their own gateway, which can be based on Apollo Federation, can be based on anything else, or it could just be a gateway people build, like with any basic programming language you use to create a gateway. And then you have people going for a more federation kind of approach. So this sort of summarized what he said, but I think it's interesting to see that people have multiple ways to do federation. So it's either by building a gateway completely yourself by using code, or by using the schemas you already have from your federated services and then bring them together somewhere. So I think it's also quite an interesting time as you see more companies. So with StepZen, we're taking an approach on this, and you see also open source tools from the guild that try to solve this problem. So it's quite an interesting stuff. Also with Apollo, of course, with Federation 2. So I see Federation actually getting more and more of an increased traction with people.
Yeah, I'd agree with that. We see a lot of kind of customers come to us with content needs, but they also want to bring in data from many other sources and kind of bring that all together and get it to work. Like we spent so long moving from this monolith, like breaking the monolith up into microservices, and now we kind of want to bring all of those microservices back into kind of some federated graph. And a lot of people that I speak to at Graph CMS, the customers using us and creating content. It's not just about content anymore, though. Like it's kind of bringing content from other services and being able to kind of use our query API, our mutation API to then, change data that happens in other systems. So it's really interesting that, we've kind of broken this thing up into different kind of best of breed services and then bringing them through this gateway. And a lot of people want these managed as well. Like gone are the days, and I know I said about the yoga before, but like gone are the days of people kind of wanting to just, gone are the days of people having to build everything. There's good tools to kind of federate for us and kind of give us this one endpoint and give us access to those different services. But comes with that ton of different issues, caching and so much more. So yeah, it's an interesting time, and it's something which I'm seeing an increasing amount of inquiries asking about this federation. So it's clearly needed, and there's many tools to support it, which is great.
Totally. It's definitely a thing. When you're thinking about these educational initiatives around federation, what are some things you're thinking about? Like, what do people struggle with, or what do they need to know, Janessa?
I think probably one of the biggest ones is just the sheer amount of vocabulary. I think, like even if you're coming into Federation with some base level knowledge of GraphQL, Federation just introduces just like a lot more concepts, just a lot more to learn. And so I think part of the challenge is kind of just retaining that knowledge, and then from there actually putting that knowledge into practice and building things out. And so what we're working on, if anyone's ever used Apollo Odyssey, it's like our free learning platform. We have one series of courses out right now that's kind of an intro to GraphQL, intro to Apollo. And we're actively working on right now a big federation series, which is kind of twofold to help people learn how to implement federation like from day one in a project. And then also the flip side of taking an existing like monolithic like GraphQL API and kind of modularizing it, breaking it out, and then creating your own federated service that way. Because those are kind of the two biggest use cases that we see of people that come in like, hey, we've never used GraphQL. We'd like to just start with federation. So from an educational standpoint, we felt like it was important to kind of hit on both of those because the approach might be a little bit different. There's different nuances, kind of issues you might run into with that. But kind of long story short, a lot of vocab, but also just people coming from different places of where they're already at in their GraphQL journey and trying to figure out how to make the learning curve and the adoption process a little less painful, have better developer experience.
Nice. Yeah, I think that's a big deal. It is interesting. Some people are starting out totally with just federated GraphQL APIs, and that's a very different thing than having to decompose your existing graph. So cool stuff. Any other federation thoughts that anybody has? How that's being used in other tools, or thumbs up, thumbs down? That was the conversation like 6 months ago, I feel like. And now everyone's like, well, we're going to do this anyway. So everybody get on board.
Yeah, I only hope that people don't see federation as an excuse to make microservices out of anything. So often I see people doing like creating microservices before you actually need them. So federation is cool, but if you don't need it, then that's also fine.
Yeah.
Yeah, so one thing I'll throw in there, Janessa is definitely right about just learning all of the terminology and stuff around federated GraphQL stuff, because I didn't even know that's what I was doing for a good chunk of time. It's like, oh, that's what that's called. Okay.
That's so funny. Yeah, I feel. Go ahead, Dustin.
Oh, I was just gonna say, I guess I have a question, which is kind of, there are different approaches to federated graphs. I've definitely done one where I've gone all my microservice APIs just happen to be REST or some other like Lambda function API, and then I just have like my key graph in the middle. But I've also seen it where, hey, every microservice is a graph. Like, what? If any of you have an opinion on this, like which one are you seeing more adoption of? Which one are you liking more? What do you think is going to be the pattern that rules them all one day? Is it going to be a mix of everything always?
Probably a mix of everything, I would say. Because is REST really ever going to go away? So I think it'll end up being a mix of all kinds of stuff. As long as we don't bring SOAP back, GraphQL is going to be able to handle everything.
That's a good key takeaway from this. As long as we don't bring soap back. Yeah. Anybody else? Have you observed any of those patterns, one more than the other?
Yeah, I see a lot of different stuff actually. So
yeah,
the cool thing about having microservices is that each service could have its own providers or its own protocol or whatsoever. So that's something you see often because if you have microservices in your team, you have a large company, then probably everyone has their own way of writing microservices. So one team might do it with lambdas, while another one maybe expose a REST API, and the other one also has a graph. So that can be a strong point of federation, at least in the way StepZen does it. You can combine different data sources, so that could be an option. But then again, it could also be nice to write a schema for every service and force like teams to have a microservice with a graph in order to be able to federate it through multiple different services.
Nice. Milecia, people are asking specific questions of you. Do you want me to put you on the spot right now?
Sure.
So Michael says, what is the fastest way to go from a pandas data frame to a GraphQL interface exposing it? I want to encourage people in the chat to ask questions. So that's why I'm taking this one, even though.
Like that is a really good question. So I'm thinking about if you have a pandas data frame, maybe you can do something to like wrap that in some kind of Python API. Maybe you use Flask or something, and then you can have like that particular data exposed as part of the GraphQL interface. But just having like a Python project, I'm pretty sure GraphQL doesn't integrate with just like pure machine learning stuff. I haven't tried that yet though, so that's a really good question, but that's what comes off the top of my head. Just wrap your pandas data frame in some kind of Flask API and use GraphQL to serve it to whatever from there.
Nice. I love it. I would not know how to answer that question, so I think that's great. So thinking through, we've talked a little bit about like vocabulary can be hard. Shifting people's mindsets on REST can be kind of tough too. What do you think as you're working, a lot of you are working with clients to implement GraphQL solutions or with students. What do you think is the hardest part about implementing GraphQL? Like what is the hardest part about migrating?
I think it's schema. It's the schema design and the structure of your content or data. You can come to GraphQL and have some kind of mindset of something you were using before. Maybe as you had that kind of a one-to-one mapping of your database before, and that was kind of served over an endpoint. And it's easy to just dump those into GraphQL as a type. And there's tools that can do that automatically. But that's often not helpful. And if that's not implemented correctly, can cause N+1 problems and what have you. So I think designing a schema, if you've got the luxury, like not everybody does have the luxury, like to just build something from scratch. But if you can, spend the time to design a schema that works for, the where you're implementing it, and that can often help significantly reduce time building front ends. I've seen tons of clients bring across content from other content CMSs, and they've just created one mappings of what that content looked like before, but in GraphQL, it doesn't look great. Yeah, you could just argue that it's data, but if you kind of want to have a good developer experience as well, like it's important for everybody, not just the end product, but those building that end product to have a good experience. I think starts with schema, in my opinion, anyway.
Yeah, I totally agree. And I think bringing a lot of people into the process of defining that schema is really important too. A lot of times I'll see very enthusiastic group of GraphQL enthusiasts. Enthusiastic group of enthusiasts is a great sentence. I'll see this group though, and they'll be like, we're going to take care of the GraphQL piece. And then they don't really include a lot of other people in that process just because teaching everybody about schema design is tough, or it's hard to get everybody together. But I have found that if you really incorporate everyone's opinions into that document, it's harder at the beginning, but it also ultimately leads to less kind of tearing everything down and starting over again down the road. So what about other folks? Go ahead.
I think schema design is a good one, but it also depends, of course. If you already have a database design, then it would make sense to have some sort of correlation between the two. But if you don't, then it gets more interesting. I actually ran a poll like a week or two ago, asking people like, what's difficult with GraphQL? Is it like schema, servers, resolvers? And most people actually answered resolvers. And I think that's also partly due to the graph-based thinking of GraphQL, because if you have recursive types and you need to have field resolvers, you maybe have type resolvers, maybe have query resolvers. And I think especially for newcomers, it can be quite stressful to learn about all these different concepts and trying to figure out how to build that best resolver. So I think building resolvers and writing schemas is kind of related to each other, because they can be the same thing if you have like a code first approach or a schema first approach. But I think definitely people find it hard to structure things when building their own server and building their own resolvers.
Yeah, I'll kind of piggyback on that, because that's the thing that I see some people have issues with when coming from REST. Most people are like, oh, I'm just going to code this and basically play with it until it works. Whereas with GraphQL, you have to have so much defined up front that it's just a mental shift of how do you start work, versus with REST where it's like, I need an endpoint that does this thing. Go make that endpoint. Open up Postman and bomb it until something happens. So really just getting everybody to start thinking about their schema up front, which sounds like something we should do already. But I think that's the biggest mental shift that I've seen, is just getting people to think about the schema up front and not go straight to writing resolvers in code first.
Yeah.
Maybe a follow-up question to all this for everybody is, we've talked about the most challenging thing is schemas and resolvers maybe, but what are maybe some pitfalls once people master kind of defining their schema, understanding how to build a resolver? What's like that next pitfall that they run into and are maybe struggling with these days in trying to adopt? I'll share my answer. It's the old idea that I have to return IDs for entities. I on many a team I've worked on, it's like, hey, there's this relationship between thing A and thing B, so I'll just return thing B's ID as like a top level entity instead of returning the actual entity itself. People like, I find that's a really hard grasp. Like, that's a big leap. Never worked in REST, so why would it work in GraphQL? I guess is the mentality shift.
Yeah, I think there are quite some pitfalls, especially if you start building your own server and you come from REST, then you're going to find out all these things. So first you start building your schema, your resolvers, but then you need to think about authentication, caching, so all these kind of things. I think they sort of pile up when you build your own GraphQL server. So I think my biggest recommendation would be, if you build a GraphQL server, make sure to also think about these things before you start building. So building a schema resolver is not the only thing. You also need to figure out how to do authentication, caching, maybe even logging or monitoring.
Yeah, I think a pitfall actually connected to what you said, Roy, is assuming you need to build a server from scratch, right? Like there's tons of different tools out there that do this for you. So maybe that's the best thing, and they allow you to kind of connect and federate with other services, connect in storage and whatever else. So yeah, I would say a pitfall is just diving in straight away, creating a server when there could be a viable solution out there that does it. And that could be more cost effective at the end of the day.
Yeah, I think piggybacking off of that, because I feel like we've had this common theme of like, planning really well before just diving in, whether that's your schema or your resolvers, but then also what Jamie was just talking about kind of knowing what your needs are and picking what tools and things that you use based on your needs. But like both your short-term needs, but also like if you have like long-term roadmaps already, kind of being able to foresee, well, maybe we don't need this tool now, but the direction we want to head in, the kind of like plans and the benchmarks that we have, we're probably going to need this. So let's structure our GraphQL in such a way that when we need to add this thing later on, it'll be a little bit easier instead of having to like rip everything out and like rebuild things all over again.
We had a question from the audience that I think piggybacks this as well. It's from Niels, and he asked, regarding schema-first approach and properly designing upfront, how do you deal with modeling the domain for big, complex legacy projects, gathering info, etc.?
Really, the best way that I've seen this, or the most not pain-inducing later on way I've seen, is just take the time to do it up front. Like, go talk to your product managers, go talk to support or whoever is involved in this, and get as much information as you can. And then if you just have to jump into code, just start by writing fragments or something. Just get the smallest, get all of the types that you think you need and then slowly add to them. Like, maybe just, I don't know. It's hard getting all of the things from all of the people up front, but that's really the best you can do with those big, complicated things. Get what you can and expand as soon as you can.
Yeah, I would piggybacking on the federation theme of this call today. I think if you split this up into everybody who has something to add to the overall kind of gateway graph, let's call it, if those individual teams begin to think about what data they want to expose or what parts of the team want to access what, then it becomes a lot easier to kind of build that overall schema, right? Whether you do some kind of federated approach where you kind of just bundle them all together as one, but then each team has its own responsibility for design. But I'm guessing there would be kind of some overarching theme or trend or design patterns you kind of want to discuss first. How do we manage filtering? How do we, how do we do all of that stuff? So yeah, it's a good question. And then I actually had a question related to this as well, which was, does anyone here use any particular tools to kind of show like an ERD of what your data looks like? I know there's a few kind of that I've used in the past, but I don't know how active they are anymore. I was just curious, is there anything that anyone's been using similar as well that could help you to answer that question?
How do you mean? Like translating
like
something to
something like GraphQL Voyager, I think it was called. Being able to kind of map your schema and show what that looks like. I'm just curious, is there anything similar to that today that is a product offering or open source tool?
I'll say I've been bad about it, and I do it the manual way and not the automated way. So I keep a lucid usually as I'm building up a schema. I'll put like, hey, here's a type, and every time I introduce new things, I'll connect my node, create my graph, kind of show how it interconnects. It gets messy as the graphics fans, and I think an automated ERD would be infinitely better than this, but I haven't found anything like that I've enjoyed.
Yeah, Voyager is the only one I had heard about. If anyone in the chat knows, please, please
Let us
share.
know.
Yeah, we'll pull it up live.
We'll pull it up live. Totally. Yeah, I think that's really useful for visualizing that. And as Milecia said, getting everybody on board early on to really, I think it is sort of like you have to really decide what you should be modeling in your schema and what you shouldn't, because there's a tendency to be like, well, that junk is in our old database. I'm talking about myself too. Like on my own projects, like we have this, so it probably is useful, but no one really ever uses that field of data ever. And it's not useful to the client tool that we're building or whatever. So it may be that it isn't appropriate to put in the schema. So yeah, I think making those decisions is really important. We got more questions coming through. I love it. Michael asks, could one create a GraphQL API from a database by specifying only the diffs? Is there a tool which does that? I read that off of the small comment and not the big, cool graphic, and it was harder to read. Anybody have any thoughts about that one?
I was trying to figure out which one you were about to read. I was like,
You're like,
and as soon as you said the name, I was like, there it goes.
I think that's cool.
I wish Tanmai was here, because then I'm sure something at Hersura actually does this, and he could speak to it better than any of us. But I don't know for sure.
Yeah, me either. Like, I haven't seen anything like that before.
Yeah, I haven't
I'm
either.
wondering what you mean actually by specifying only the diffs.
Yeah.
It's kind of because with StepZen you can create a GraphQL API based on top of your MySQL Postgres without having to write any codes. But I'm not sure what you mean with specifying the diffs.
There's tools to inspect diffs of schema changes and alert you whether they are breaking or not. I don't know if that's related to the question, but in that same realm of subject, if you are manually kind of creating some schema somewhere and you push that to GitHub in a pull request, there's tools to kind of plug in and notify you what changes have happened, whether these are breaking or not, and you can kind of configure rules to what's acceptable or not. That might be related. And I guess if you were to take those diffs, you could do it in a atomic way of just creating a new GraphQL schema with the changes, if that makes sense. So the change schema, there's certainly tools to allow you to do that as well, I think. Maybe that's yeah.
Gonna add some clarification that's coming from the chat. Michael's added, redact this table, add a calculated column, decide if you make a class by aggregation or subclassing tables with one-to-one relationship. I think that's the diffing clarification.
That was a really good question.
Yeah. I think you might need to build it, Michael. You know?
Yeah. I think we'd all use
it. By next time we do this, we'll have to introduce your tool.
I'm actually curious if Prism could do it, because it's really the way that they've structured the it probably doesn't do it out of the box right now, but the way that you define a Prism schema, you know, you could probably take that and translate it to GraphQL in an automated way. So interesting thought to share.
Awesome. Jamie has to head out for his next big talk at GraphQL Berlin. Hop over to that one after this if you want to.
Yeah, you can catch up afterwards, but everyone that's
Yeah.
watching, stay. And thanks very much for having me.
Awesome. Thanks, Jamie. Great talking with you.
Great having you, Jamie. We have another question from the audience. JR asked, JR says, a bit of a beginner, is GraphQL a viable communication protocol for IoT devices? What are viable options or means for such things?
I'll actually kind of touch on that because I play with weird stuff. But I think you can use GraphQL to do IoT stuff because you can use REST to do IoT stuff. There's like nothing super specific to GraphQL for IoT, if that's what you mean, though. But you can totally like trigger some kind of hardware to do an action. Like you can schedule a job or, call a command or something to make a motor move or whatever it is you want to do. Like I made a little IoT thing to find my dog because he is very much like an old man and he ignores me. So I found out you can plug like those type of APIs into GraphQL. Like I said, it's just not GraphQL specific.
Yeah, you definitely can. It's something I've wanted to play around with. I had an idea for a talk a long time ago where you would use GraphQL mutations for just ridiculous things on a stage, like making a fog machine work or making balloons drop on an audience or confetti or things like that. So I've lightly looked into that, and you totally can, but I just haven't built it because COVID happened and I didn't want to throw balloons on people in public anymore as much. So maybe someday we'll get back
That sounds
to
like
that.
a fun talk, though.
We'll get back to that at some point.
I think sign us all up. We'll be there.
It's very stupid. But yeah, I think because there's so much flexibility about what transport GraphQL can work over, you can definitely use it for that. So JR, build a thing and show us that thing, and we will love to see it.
One more from the audience, unless somebody
Yeah.
wants to add to JR's question. Go once.
Yeah, the only thing I wanted to add there was that GraphQL is, if you have IoT devices and you want IoT devices to communicate with each other, then you can use GraphQL, but it's probably not the best choice. You probably need some sort of contract between the two devices. So if you really want to build this with GraphQL, do it. If you want to look at something maybe more optimized for this, have a look at gRPC, which is especially made for service to service or machine to machine communications. But you can definitely do it with GraphQL, and maybe as you're here today, you should.
And then, quick follow-up to this. Milecia, Michael wants to know, what device do you use on the dog to track it?
So it's actually this Arduino Uno with just an obnoxious buzzer on it. It's not even in a really nice case or anything. I think I put it in like a sweet tart box because it was the only thing that could hold all the wires and sensors without me making something. So yeah, it's not fancy. It's not that great. I don't really use it anymore because my dog hated it, but it was fun for a little bit.
How big is the device? How big is the device? I'm kind of curious now.
It's pretty much the size of a smart heart box. So it's like probably about this big.
Oh, wow.
So that my dog did not like that on his collar. It's not very heavy though.
That's so funny.
I kind of love that. Kamal has asked, does GraphQL solve the N+1 issue that ORMs like Ruby on Rails Active Record have? And we have a answer in the audience that data loader is a solution. But does anybody else have any other solutions other than data loaders? That's the only one that comes to my mind. I'm actually curious if Hollow is thinking about anything in this space.
I'm sure they are, and I'm probably just not in the loop. But I can double check on that and follow up. But
And I think this is also like one of the problems we touched earlier, like what's hard with GraphQL. And so GraphQL, it can be used to solve the N+1 problem, but still it depends on where you get your data from and how do you get it. So you still need to get your data from your database. And if you build a server yourself, you can use data loader when you build resolvers. You still need to have an ORM or a database connection or whatsoever. And if you don't solve the N+1 problem on that level, at least when building your code, you're not actually solving it. So it really depends on how you hook up your data sources whenever you decide to build your own server.
Yeah. Yeah, I think the Apollo REST data sources and some of those other data source tools can help with some of those problems as well. So that's worth checking out. Those docs talk about using those in combo with data loader, but there's a lot of caching that you get out of those tools out of the box. So that's kind of a cool thing to check out too. But yeah, it depends what data source you're using, as Roy said. So
I'll actually confirm what you just shared. We were on a project, we were trying to mix data loaders, REST data sources, and custom caching all at once. And I will say, don't do that. That was a terrible idea.
how did that feel altogether? Yeah.
Kludgy is the best adjective I can think of. No, it's REST data sources does all of the other things. So like Apollo did a really good job with that. Thank you, Janessa and team. So like definitely if you're doing like REST data sources, do that. And then if you're like, actually I have the database or I need something else, like definitely like caching and data loaders together. I think they're a really nice solution. And actually, if you have a good cache like Memcache or Redis in play, you don't even need the data loaders. You'll want them over time, but you don't really need them.
Yeah. I think that's one of those things with GraphQL that always gets brought up too, as far as like hardest stuff. And the hardest stuff about building anything in general is caching. So any tools that you would recommend for that, either front end or back end?
Not in particular at the moment.
Yeah. Cool. Just throwing it out there. I always like, I think the new Apollo client stuff is pretty exciting for caching on the front end. Janessa, do you have any Apollo client hot things that are on the march coming out?
We just within the past couple months, Apollo Client 3.5 released, which has had a lot of stuff around caching.
Yeah.
So one of the bigger ones has been like when you're writing your results to the in-memory cache. I think before it was like waiting. It was trying to identify the written objects before traversing the fields, and with 3.5, it's doing it after, which simplifies the identification, reduces a lot of duplicate work when writing results to the cache, which we're always fans of simplifying and reducing duplicate work, right? And then, well, there was one more. There's a couple other methods around the Apollo cache. I think it's called update query and update fragment, I believe it's called, are also efforts with caching to simplify really common updating patterns when you're like using like read query and write query. You can go check it out yourself. There's like the big change log on the GitHub repo. It's all just out there open for people to read. But
awesome. That's great. And thank you so much, Milecia. I know you have to go teach cool data visualization things. So we'll look forward to, I want to take that class. So I'm just going to ask you more about it for next time.
I'm doing it again in April.
I'll be there. I will.
Please.
See you later.
All right. Have a good one, everybody.
You too.
I don't know if Jesse was serious with this question, but I'm going to put it up on the screen.
Okay.
Janessa, feel free to not answer it. Jesse asks, Apollo client SSR hydration with auth tokens? Question mark.
That is very outside my realm of expertise. I'm sorry. I can ask internally on Slack and I can answer it on Twitter, but I don't have an answer right now. Sorry about that.
I know why Jesse's asking you the question. We've actually ran into that issue on a recent project together. So we'll reach out on Twitter.
Okay.
Reminder to everybody that we're all on Twitter.
Yeah.
Roy, I don't think I had your handle up, but you want to shout yours out real quick?
Yeah, so my Twitter is @GetHackteam.
So
Nice.
definitely everybody here and everybody who was here, we're all on Twitter. The conversation doesn't stop here. It just started here. And we're going to keep it going for a little while longer. It sounded like a wrap up. I'm not trying to wrap.
We have at least 9 minutes more to talk about things. So, so what else? As far as I know, things are in various stages of happening and not happening. Are there any GraphQL events that are coming up that y'all are excited about, or other than today? We're almost toward the end. Yeah.
Well, me personally, I'm really hoping there will be a GraphQL conf in Europe again. So last year and the year before
Nice.
it was cancelled, and the year before I was speaking there in Berlin. It was really amazing because the conference was like almost doubling in size every year, and then the pandemic hit. So I'm really
Yeah.
hoping for that one to pull through.
Oh, cool. Nice. When does that usually happen? Like fall?
It's around summer, and I
Oh,
think
summer.
the core team also visits from the US mostly. I think most people are there or were there. But yeah, especially with GraphQL, I mean, adoption is increasing every year, and the conference is growing every year. So I hope we can
Yeah.
get the momentum again to meet in person and meet all these different GraphQL people there.
Totally. Yeah, I'd love to go. Janessa, are there any Apollo events coming up?
Apollo usually hosts GraphQL Summit, which we had twice last year. I can't remember off the top of my head when the next one is.
Cool. Yeah, it just happened in November, so no pressure to
I don't even
have
know if
another
picked
conference
the
right
set
away.
date yet, but
yeah, totally.
But if it's anything like last year, probably around April.
Nice.
TBD though.
Cool. Yeah, those are always really fun. There's a lot of good panels and interesting things about how people are implementing GraphQL for real. Sometimes, I don't know.
Yeah.
It's nice to hear people's perspective who have been through the trenches of making all the mistakes and then knowing what to do.
Yeah.
Differently.
Something that we tried in November was kind of having two different sessions, like kind of geared towards different audiences, like experience levels.
Yeah.
Which I actually really appreciated, because there's like, at least for me personally, I know I'm pretty aware of my knowledge gaps. And so there were some things I was like, okay, I can go watch this session that's a little bit more advanced because I know a little bit more about that stuff. And then there were like other talks I was like, I should switch to the other session. So that was something I really liked. I hope we do that again, because I felt like, I mean, you get more speakers out there, but I also feel like the accessibility-ness of making an event for like a wider audience of like a broader range of experience levels, I thought was also really a really nice touch.
Totally. Yeah, I think there's people who are, we all assume everyone has been using GraphQL since the first day that it rolled out, and that's just like not true. A lot of folks are adopting it now and will continue to over the next 5-10 years. So yeah, it's really cool to get people in the door, no matter what level they're at. That's awesome.
We have another audience
Do
question.
it. Let's do
Let's
it.
do it. Debbie asks, also, winter is coming. Winter is here, everybody. But Debbie says, what are your thoughts on the guild rewriting most of the GraphQL tools in Rust? Do you think it will bring new people into the project? Or are you learning Rust to prepare?
Oh wow, that's a complicated question. What I do think is, well, GraphQL started out as being a JavaScript project, or actually within Facebook it was PHP. So it's not really new that companies are changing GraphQL tools or GraphQL products into different languages. And I also think if you look at GraphQL itself, or especially complicated backend stuff, I think JavaScript isn't the best solution to build all these things in there. So I don't know if they're actually building stuff in Rust, but I do think you do see it more often. I know Netflix also built their federation gateway with Kotlin. StepZen use Go for the backend, and so I don't think it's actually a new thing that GraphQL products being written in something else than JavaScript.
I will say I've recently built, can't say more than I've built Apollo tooling in another language. That's about all I can say about it right now, but it's been an interesting project in its own right, adapting the client actually instead of the server for front ends, which has been really exciting. I think everybody sees what's been done and is really excited about that tool chain and wants to use it in as many projects as possible for not only the performance gains, but some of the state management and caching that it brings to the table as well.
Yeah, I know at Apollo, the Apollo router is written in Rust, and then we have this other library, Apollo RS, which is just more GraphQL tools. That one's also written in Rust. Mostly like for those performance gains, right? Rust can just handle more than JavaScript can. So
Yeah. Yeah, I think in general, a lot of folks are moving toward that. So I'm learning Rust right now to prepare, actually. So yeah, it's a pretty cool, a pretty cool migration happening just because we love JavaScript, but we've asked it to do a lot. So as Roy said, it's not necessarily the perfect tool for every job, even though we've kind of we forced it into that role. So we can bring other tools to the table and other languages to the table. I feel like it's not a bad thing.
I hear good things about Rust. I haven't looked at it yet, but everybody who talks about it is like, it's the future. But people also say other things are the future, so I'm gonna give it a little longer. Just a little bit.
Just a little bit. Slightly.
Just a little bit. Like maybe another 6 weeks.
6 weeks sounds like a perfect amount of time. Let's see. So as far as we kind of touched on the Federation stuff before quite a bit, but we had a question for Roy here about kind of StepZen and how Federation is affecting the roadmap over there. And I'm wondering, like, how does StepZen think about Federation, and how is that impacting what you're doing over there?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, so the way we see it is, so you can use StepZen to build a gateway or data layer or a service that brings together all your other data sources. So these can be other GraphQL servers, these can be databases, it can be REST APIs. So the way we see it as Federation is just a way to bring together data from multiple endpoints or multiple services into one layer that you can use as a what we like to call a data layer for your other applications. So Federation shouldn't be just for GraphQL. It can also be for all the other languages out there. And I think it touches in the beginning, but Lee Byron also said during the last GraphQL contributor days, he shared some experience he had with Federation and from other companies. And it's quite interesting to see that all these companies have different sort of opinions about Federation. And you can even say if you have a monolith, which the whole team is working on, and you distribute who is in charge of which part of the monolith, it can also be Federation. So it's quite an interesting approach to how you really look at it, and what actually is Federation also depends on your company and your teams and the way you work together, the way you take ownership over the main graph that's being used. So I see Federation mostly as creating a main graph for your company or your team. That can be other services, but it can also be just within one giant monolith if that's what your company is doing.
Yeah.
Did Lee's comments at Contributor Day really validate what y'all were doing over at StepZen? I'm just curious. And ditto for
Um,
Janessa over at Apollo.
Yeah. So yes and no. So what he said is, for some teams it makes sense to use federation via a schema, and for some teams it's just better to write something in a programming language of choice and federate all your services there by hand. So I think for us it didn't really change anything because every company is different, and not all companies have the size of Facebook or Robinhood and have the resources to build something entirely by themselves.
Yeah, kind of in that same vein. I think it really just depends on what your needs are, like how complex is your project already that you're looking at, and also what your priorities are, right? Do you have the time to like sit down and write your own server and like break it out into all of these schemas, or do you want something a little bit more out of the box that does a lot of it for you? So yeah, I think just a case by case basis, just pick the right tool for you and for your needs. Obviously at Apollo, we're trying to make Federation like have that developer experience to be a lot smoother so that it is the right tool for more people. So on the education side, because that's going to be a big part of the developer experience, right, is like learning how to do all of these things and if that's even going to be the right thing for you. That's one of our big pushes at Apollo this year, is trying to help people have a better understanding more quickly of what Apollo Federation is specifically, and so that you can have a better understanding of whether or not that's the right tool for you and if that's going to solve what you're trying to accomplish. I don't know if I answered that question exactly.
You answered it how you wanted to answer it, and that's what's important. No, it was a great answer. I think it really, I mean, it kind of goes back to the point, like federation is going to be what makes sense for you, your team, who you're working with, and how you decide to federate your graph is important. And there's more than one way to do it. And I think that's the key here. Like there's not one size fits all.
As much as we would love that, right?
Yeah. And not
Unreal.
every company is Facebook, as Roy said. I think that's like something to always keep in the back of your head. And I thought, Janessa, what you said is interesting about like, I was about to ask the question to the group, how do you pick a tool to choose from? And like, how do you choose which tool to use? Because I feel like that's something I get asked all the time, is like, just tell me what to use. I can't spend 10 weeks choosing the right thing and have it be the wrong thing and all of that. So I think education is a big part of that, like good docs, good tutorials, having that makes it an easier pick. But what are some other things you think about when selecting a tool for GraphQL or really anything?
I think part of it is, at least for me personally, is what kind of project am I trying to use GraphQL in?
Mm-hmm.
So like more recently, for any front end devs out there, Remix.js has recently come out and has been growing. And one of their things is with like loaders and like fetching data, it's just a little bit different. And so just like working on side projects and stuff where like for this kind of project, it makes sense to, I'm just going to use Prisma and just go get my data. I don't even need that GraphQL layer. But like for different kinds of projects, like internally at Apollo, we have our own federated graph, where if you've used Apollo Studio, it's kind of like our GraphQL playground. That's a gross overgeneralization and it's oversimplification. But so there's a graph for that. There's a graph for Odyssey, our learning platform, that are federated together so that you can like link your user accounts and stuff. The way that we're using our data and things internally, federation makes sense at Apollo. So I think it depends on what I'm trying to accomplish, like on the client, where I'm using the data, how I'm using it all, the complexity of the data and how much I have. But
I'm gonna make a plug for a fun project I'm doing. So my team's creating a bunch of different technology stacks right now, and we're kind of creating showcases of how to combine different tools. So Angular, Apollo, Tailwind, React Query, and style components. You name it, we're mixing with different things. Like we're trying Vite with React. We're doing a remix one. I'm really excited once we actually launch all of these. But we've been using GitHub's GraphQL APIs kind of the basis for everything. So it's all GraphQL at the end of the day. We might do a REST one in there just for comparison's sake. Just be like, here's what it would look like if you went the other pattern. And it's been, I think the most interesting part has been learning what different technologies fit really well together, both client and server. Because our server solution for everything has been standardized. We use the same backend 3 times over because it's just an OAuth server. But I would have been curious, like, had we built the entire backend from scratch and done something that wasn't GitHub, would we have chosen something like, if we went the Angular route, would we have chosen Nest? Because those are a good combination together, and Nest has a great GraphQL integration. Versus if we went the React route, I'm a big fan of kind of the serverless stack these days. Like, would we have stuck with that, or would we've gone an express route? Like, I don't really know. So I like the original question of like, what do you choose? And I think decision fatigue is a real problem, especially as you're deciding what tool. And I think it's what's your team comfortable with at the end of the day. Like, you can make any tool fit. It's more of a question of how do you make it fit. My 2 cents on the problem. Right, you got anything to add?
Yeah, so like you said, it's I think choosing something, it's also a funnel, right? So you start looking at what are people using, and then what is community adoption, and then somehow you maybe end up with 1, 2, 3 choices. And then it's up to the team, like figure out what suits you best, what do you like to work with, and are there any real arguments against using a certain tool? Because I've been in large discussions with a lot of people about small aspects of a framework that really annoyed them, which was for them a reason not to use it. So I think really start by looking at what's being popular, what's being used by companies, then start looking at adoption, like is there any roadmap, what does the GitHub look like? If you do something that is maybe a SaaS, also look at pricing. If it doesn't have like a hockey stick pricing that you will pay way more as soon as you get to skill phases. And then your final choice should be what fits the team or the developer.
Yeah, I feel like it's hard. Who's using it, I feel like, is a big piece that affects a lot of folks' decisions. And it's like, well, they are, so we should, or we have to. But I think that that's generally sort of helpful because people will often speak to their experiences. And that's why going to community events is a big deal, because you can hear how people are, how they're faring with choosing the tools that they chose. So I like it.
What are you thinking?
What am I thinking? Should we do one more question or should we wrap it up?
I think we have one more. I think we got time for one more question, and we have time for a quick plug from you because there was a direct question for you. How are you going about learning Rust?
So I'm in the process of taking a course on LinkedIn Learning. And then I also got rustadventure.dev is a really cool course that Chris Biscardi created. And I like that one a lot. They have good docs too. And those are kind of the 3 so far, but I need to build like a real project with it. And I'm hoping to build something sort of IoT-ish with it. That's a long story, but lights will be involved. A costume will be involved. But yeah, there's a lot of cool capabilities there. And I think if you're curious about it, I feel like a lot of jobs are asking for that skill on resumes and things like that. So might be a cool thing to investigate. So good question, Debbie. Let me know if you have other Rust learning resources that are out there. I heard
good things about Rust for JavaScript developers. So it's
Yeah.
rust4js.dev.
Yeah.
It's created by Sid.
Yeah.
He's active on Twitter as well. I can't pronounce his last name, unfortunately, but it's rust4js.dev, and it's specifically tailored for JavaScript developers that want to learn Rust. So it could be interesting for people to check out as well.
Nice. Yeah, that looks like a great one. Rust4js.dev. Enroll now. I'm going to. What else? Jesse says Rust for Rustations, idiomatic programming for experienced developers. Good resources too. Love it. I just like the little crab, realistically, and I want to associate myself with that little Rust crab as much as possible.
Well, Eve, did you have one more question you wanted to bring to the table?
Let's see. Let's think about some like GraphQL foundation things. I know that a lot of companies are already involved in the foundation and the spec and things like that. Are there, like, if you could pick one thing to add to the GraphQL spec, what would it be? If you could add that right here. For me, it would be, I would like defer and stream to drop so that these other companies will implement them for real. This allows us to kind of incrementally load data in a cool way, thinking about it more like a stream than a response. So highly recommend checking those out. Those are coming soon, but any other proposals that are out there or things you would want?
I think one of the...
Go ahead.
Oh, sorry, go ahead.
I was just saying the defer and stream as well.
Yeah, cool. Sorry to steal the obvious answer right at the top.
I mean, it's exciting for a reason.
I know, right? How about you, Roy?
I think for me, still, one of the biggest things that would be nice to implement is have some sort of HTTP status codes. So that's one of the main complaints people give whenever they start learning GraphQL. The first thing they say is, why do I get a 200 OK and my whole query is full of errors? Yeah. So it would be nice if there is some lightweight method to apply, just to let people know things aren't okay.
Yeah, I love that one. That one is so great. People get so upset about that, and I'm just like, I'm really sorry. I didn't invent that, but it would be cool to have a solution.
I'll add mine. It's not on any roadmap, and I don't think there's any stomach for it, but I would love union types. There's... And it's... wait, am I saying that right? No, I'm saying intersection types. I've had this use case where I want to take two existing types, combine them together to create a new type. And there's ways to do it at the query level, but there's not a way to do it at the scalar level. And I really want it at the scalar level. Don't ask me why. I've run into multiple projects where I just want it, but it's I've brought it up before. Nobody's interested. I think I'm the only person who's ever thought about it.
You never know. You got to get on that committee and start pitching. Yeah.
They gave me a good reason against it. It doesn't really fit the spec, and I respected it. I was like, okay, I'll take deferred stream.
Yeah, can't go wrong with those two.
There's so many good things. It's hard to be like, yeah, the one thing I want, like, do or die on that hill. No, I'll just go create a new scalar. It's fine.
Threaten to quit GraphQL over that. Yeah.
Absolutely not. I like it too much.
That's awesome.
Well, awesome. Well, I'll throw up the slide.
Yeah.
Thank you all for coming. Special thanks to all our amazing panelists. I wish Jamie and Milecia were still here, but they had to go do other amazing things. But Janessa and Roy, we really appreciate that you're still here. We appreciated everything everybody had to share today, and it's been a wonderful conversation. Like I mentioned earlier, the conversation started here, but it didn't stop here. All of us are on Twitter, so definitely come find us. Let's have some conversations and continue like hyping up this GraphQL train. Let's keep it going.
Awesome. Thanks, everybody.
Thank you.
Thanks, everyone.